here at the Open Mobile Summit. Pleased to be joined by Mitchell Baker. She's the chairman of Mozilla, of course the maker of the Firefox browser. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, for those who don't know, tell us just briefly what your role is at the company and sort of aside from the Firefox browser, what else you guys do?
Sure. As chairwoman, I work on a couple things. I make sure that all the different things we do as Mozilla tie together into a cohesive whole. And I also make sure that we build products in a way that represents Mozilla, meaning open source, nonprofit, community-based. We're an unusual organization, and so I'm the keeper of that aspect of Mozilla.
Okay, so you talk about the importance of the open web. Now we're moving more to mobile computing.
Yes.
Tell us exactly what the trend is now in terms of getting the open operating system, because so many of these are closed systems, whether it's iOS, Android.
Yeah.
Purports to be more open, but still is controlled by Google. Where does Firefox and Mozilla in particular fit into this?
What we're trying to do is to make the web the platform, which is a sort of a tagline, but conveys many things. So for us, the web means not browsers and links, but a way of thinking and a way of designing a system. The great thing about the web is that it was decentralized. You could have any computer anywhere in the world and you could connect. You could be a developer anywhere in the world and make what you wanted and connect it to the network and see if people were interested in it.
How has that changed?
And the other piece was, as a consumer, you could get to anything.
Okay.
You connected with your browser, you could get to any website, you could get to whatever it was you were interested in. So what you could see and do wasn't determined by your hardware. Whereas today, we have a new computing environment, we call it mobile, has different hardware, phones and tablets, has different operating systems, and it also has a different philosophy and a different architecture. Today, we've gone back to the world before the web. You buy a piece of hardware, a phone, it comes from one organization, and the hardware and the operating system and the software and the apps that you can get and where you get them and who decides if you can get them is all determined once by the device that you buy. And so that means that there's a much more centralized decision-making capability. And sometimes that's useful, sometimes it provides consistency, but it also provides a fair amount of limitations, and it means that many of the traits that made the web so explosive and so rich for society, we don't see anymore.
So you're thinking it's,
Right.
it's stifling competition, innovation, opportunity?
Yes, and certainly as we go forward, we'll stifle innovation and competition. So right now the app and mobile model is pretty new. Really 5 years old, and there's a lot about it that's really great. So what we'd like to do at Mozilla is to take some of the things about the app and mobile environment that are really great and merge them with the flexibility and creativity and power of the web. So for example, apps are nice. They're fun that you can find them. You can get them easily. If you want to buy one, it's easy to pay for one in a way that's not true on the web. You have a sense that they're yours. They're designed to do something specific and discrete, so sometimes they're easier to use and quicker. So there's a bunch of those things that are great. The web, on the other hand, was universal. Anyone could get anywhere on the web. You could have a whole different set of devices. You could have old machines, new ones.
Sure.
They could come from different vendors. You could get the same thing across all of them, and you could decide what device was good for when.
But consumers can also vote with their feet, right? If they don't like a closed operating system, they can go to other alternatives. Presumably, innovation will find its way somewhere, right? Would it perhaps through your platform or a different?
We hope so. We hope through the web. So right now there's really two choices. I guess you could say Microsoft has a third choice. So we are hoping to make the web the third platform. So Firefox OS phones are an alternative. We're trying to be one instance of the openness of the web. So you could buy a Firefox phone, but if you have other phones that are consistent with web technologies, they should all interoperate. So we're trying to be the leading edge of an alternative that is interoperable. So
let's talk about that for a minute now. So our developers, handset makers, you're starting to partner with some folks to get the operating system out there as an alternative, because obviously if you're not on the phones, you're not in the game.
Right.
So where are people finding you now, and how are your discussions going with some of the players out there? I mean, obviously those who are tied in with existing operating systems may be a little bit of a higher barrier to get paired up with some of these guys?
Well, we've seen a lot of interest. And so we have relationships with 20 or 25 mobile operators, the network operators or the carriers. And
certainly they would like to see more competition, particularly to the Apple with the
Absolutely.
subsidy model.
Absolutely. It's a little bit of a cycle where before Apple, the carriers had all the control, and now after Apple and Google have almost all of the control. And so that's an interesting change in business where we find there's a set of operators who recognize that open systems and competition are their only hope.
Right.
And so that's a useful piece because Mozilla is, at our core, we're a nonprofit organization, but part of our explicit mission is to empower competition in commercial ecosystems. So we want to work with commercial players and we want to enable competition and innovation,
right.
Even with ourselves. We view Chrome as a success for Mozilla, like having created a competitive market on the desktop is good for consumers. But it's not easy for us, but it's good for consumers.
So is this sort of the next battle? You had the browser wars, and the government very concerned about that here in the U.S. with Microsoft at that time, and now you have sort of these closed operating systems. Do we see that at some point running afoul?
Oh well, that's a tricky question, and actually really differs between the U.S. and Europe. So the European authorities are looking at Google for a range of things, and I imagine, if you're Google, it feels like no matter what you do, somebody's looking at you. And so I think we'll probably see some differences between the U.S. And Google. It's very different to have two than one. And the Microsoft setting there was one. So having two is better. I guess if you imagine having two choices of cars, it would be better than one, but it wouldn't really be enough. And
they can have any color they want as long as it's black, right? As Henry Ford said.
Yeah, exactly. But so two is a lot better than one.
Right.
Like the Apple Android division is a lot better than just Microsoft or just any one company.
Right.
It wasn't just Microsoft. But both of those follow a similar model, and we have a different view of the world and a view where you may want a highly centralized system. You may want to go to one store to get all of your apps. But in the physical world, we don't do that. Like in the physical world, let's say you're looking for cameras. Maybe you'll go to a big box store and look at cameras. But maybe you'll go to the local specialty camera shop in your town and look at very specific stuff, and you'll make your purchasing decision differently. If the high-end store has a kind of camera that is really important to you, or it's got service, or it's got support, or it's got something that you really want, you may buy there. And so there's a million variants of camera stores or shoe stores. But in our virtual world, we have one choice. And that, if you imagine, you can only go to a supermarket. And you can never go to a farmer's market and buy food. Or, you can only go to, small stores or big stores. It just doesn't make sense in our physical world. And over time, it will seem that same way in our digital life as well.
Since you guys are a different type of player, do you get, I'm curious the feedback you get from app developers and other developers who run into the new gatekeepers with the other OSs and sort of what are you hearing from these guys?
We hear two things. Primarily, we hear one, deep excitement about the architecture and our goal and our vision. One thing to remember is our phone is open, which means it is understandable. As an app developer, you can understand what's going on, you can see what's going on, you can test. If you have a problem and something doesn't work, you can really figure it out. Plus, the innovation piece is wide open. So there's immense excitement about that, coupled with the realism that today, the users are in Google Play and the App Store. So real interest in having us succeed, no guarantees. And also our target market for Firefox OS phones to enter the market is in emerging markets where...
And you're partnering up with the handset makers there.
Yes. And the network operators as well. And so for many developers, of course, many developers are not in emerging markets. And so they're looking at, is there a market for me? Is there a market for me now? Whereas developers in the emerging markets are excited. We also offer the possibility for really local content. So for some developers, it's important to be in one of the two big app stores and to be in the top 10.
Right.
That's where the money is. And the momentum is. So that's an important part. But there are many apps that make sense in a local setting that don't make sense in a global setting, where placement in a global app store isn't the most useful, because you're going to be, I don't know, 10,000th, 50,000th, 100,000th.
Right.
But in your local market, it might be a really important piece. And so there's an excitement on the local side from those developers as well.
One thing I hear from app developers a lot is the sort of, I don't know, they're a little bit perplexed at having to write different versions for different operating systems. Some are much more challenging than others, and having to make subtle changes instead of, for the web, making one piece of software that no matter which device you're on, it works. How would an open system solve this problem?
Yeah, in much the same way that the web did. So developers had this problem before the web. We had two stacks then, Microsoft and Apple. I mean, Apple had maybe 5%. Mm-hmm. I mean, it had more, but it declined. Apple lost that game to Microsoft. But there still were two stacks, and there were a devoted set of Apple users, and for a long time, developers made both. And over time, fewer and fewer developers made apps for the Mac. But what solved that was the web, which allowed all of us, whatever machine we were using, to access all content. So the same thing is possible on mobile devices, to have content built with web standards that's accessible from everywhere. Now, a couple things. It took Mozilla to make the web capable for mobile devices. We've heard for the last few years, the web can't do that, or it can't access the camera, or it can't access the accelerometer, or it can't access the dialer, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, that was only true because nobody bothered to change it. And so in the last couple of years, we've set out to change it. And so that means through a standards process, by defining standardized ways to be able to access all the capabilities of the phone through web technologies. And we've done that, and they're in the standards, and others are implementing them as well. So by setting up standards and having enough momentum, we can make it possible to write apps using web technologies that interact with phones.
Right.
Now, of course, there's some things we can't do, and that is affect the decisions of other players. Mm-hmm. So increasingly we find many apps, or many portions of many apps, are written in web technologies and then wrapped. One's for Google, one's for Apple.
Okay.
Or they're written almost completely in web technologies with a little piece of native code to do something. So at Mozilla, we try to make the need for that native code smaller and smaller, get it to zero. And then with Firefox, you don't need the wrapper. With Firefox OS, we are all web technologies, all standard-based. That's part of our goal for the future. So we hope that developers can write more and more apps totally in web technologies, deploy them immediately on Firefox OS, and then wrap them however is needed for the other systems.
And as you look to the future, we talk about apps, we talk about the web. Apps are really just a way to get there, maybe to a specific location, but you talk about them merging. How will that happen finally, and how quickly?
Well, how it happens is not entirely clear. We keep working on that. Some apps are just a way to access the web. Other apps are really silos of their own. So if you think about the apps you have, some of them there's data in them. And that data can be accessed maybe through an API, maybe, for the specific purposes that the app developer could envision. Which is a little different than being of the web, which is linkable and searchable, and you can find it, many things. So we imagine some of the convenience of apps, some of the single-purpose convenience, like an app, especially on a small mobile device, a good one is designed to do a couple things with only a couple touches. But where the information, the technologies that they're written in, and the data that they gather and accumulate are usable much more like the web, accessible from many different devices. And increasingly, at least it's my belief, that we're going to see computing power in more and more places, meaning processors or sensors or cameras or heat sensors or light sensors or all this
kind of... You're talking wearables, you're talking about in your environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Chairs, tables, lamps, all sorts of things
home.
Can be smart. Yeah. Right, smart home, smart world. So that data isn't always going to have a user interface. You know, your clothes or your chairs or your tables or your refrigerator might, because it's big enough. But that data is going to travel somewhere and be assembled somewhere.
Yeah.
So it could be, for example, you want to look at that data on a giant screen. Maybe you want to visualize it, maybe you want to process it. That data is going to come from something, might be mobile. Who knows what operating system?
Yeah.
Apple, Google, Android, Firefox OS, something brand new next year, who knows? But the data that comes out of that is going to go someplace, may have a different operating system. So if we live in a world where it's only one operating system, it means every single device and sensor has to have some commercial agreement with the operating system of your phone or tablet,
Right.
which is a pretty limited or constrained way to work. So our goal with Firefox OS is to, as I said, be standards-based, but allow data to move to any device. Like if your phone or your Firefox OS device is gathering data, it should end up in a place where you can access that data from whatever you want.
Right.
Might be a different Firefox OS device, it might not. You know, it might be a beautiful XYZ device from someone else. But increasingly, the data is going to flow and in ways we don't really understand yet. And if we get them all limited into a single paradigm, it's just not going to work well for all of us. I mean, however well-intentioned, it's just no one company is big enough and smart enough and flexible enough to enable that kind of innovation. And you know, a company's part of its goal is to provide value. So it is completely rational for each company to want to control that innovation in a way that benefits their shareholders. Good for them.
Yeah,
we just
absolutely.
want to benefit the general public. That's why we're a nonprofit. Is that the benefit we're trying to create is as a public asset, so spread more broadly.
Well, we will continue to keep an eye on it. Thanks so much for joining us, Mitchell.
My pleasure again. Thank you.